It was past midnight in San Antonio, August 14th, 1996. The streets were quiet, heavy with Texas heat. A white Chevy glided through the dark. 4 young men inside, their laughter low and reckless, chasing adrenaline more than direction. They called it rolling, driving around looking for people to rob. It sounded like mischief, not murder. But that night would turn a careless ritual into tragedy and draw a line between law and justice that the state of Texas still struggles to explain. Behind the wheel was 20-year-old Kenneth Foster Jr. He wasn't a stranger to trouble, a restless kid from a working-class neighborhood who had grown up with a sharp tongue and quicker temper. The passengers were friends from the block: Mauricio Brown, loud and unpredictable; Julia Steen, a tag-along hustler; and Duane Dillard, quiet but along for the ride. They weren't a gang, just 4 young men moving through a night with more alcohol than sense. They'd already robbed a couple earlier, a wallet here, a purse there. The kind of crime that was reckless but not unusual for boys chasing money and bravado. Then, around 2 in the morning, their path crossed with fate. On a quiet residential street, they spotted a car parked outside a home. A young woman, Mary Patrick, stood near the door. Her boyfriend, 25-year-old Michael LaHood Jr., was nearby, waiting to say goodnight. Brown told Kenneth to stop. The car rolled to a halt. The engine idled. Kenneth later said he thought Brown wanted to talk, or maybe try another robbery. But Brown stepped out with a .44 pistol in his hand. In seconds, a single shot echoed down the block. Michael LaHood collapsed on the driveway, a bullet through his head. Brown sprinted back, shouting, "Go, go!" Kenneth hit the gas. Within minutes, sirens filled the air. The killing stunned the community. Michael LaHood was from a respected family, hard-working, kind, the sort of man people pointed to as going places. Police quickly traced the suspects through witnesses and the getaway car. Within hours, all 4 were in custody. The gun was still inside. In interviews, Kenneth kept repeating one phrase: "I didn't know he was going to shoot him." But the detectives didn't seem to care. In Texas, not knowing wasn't necessarily a defense. Investigators charged all 4 with capital murder. The key was a little-known clause in the Texas Penal Code, the law of parties. Under it, anyone who helps, encourages, aids a felony can be held equally responsible if a death occurs. It doesn't matter if you never pulled the trigger, never even stepped out of the car. If you are part of the chain, the law treats you as if you fired the shot. It's one of the harshest interpretations of collective guilt in the United States. And in 1997, that law would determine Kenneth Foster's fate. The trial began in the Bexar County Courthouse, a tall stone building echoing with the sound of footsteps and press cameras. The prosecution painted Kenneth as the driver of a deadly team, arguing that he knew Brown was armed and intended to rob. They said he followed victims, enabled the attack, and shared responsibility for what came next. The defense tried to separate him from Brown's intent. They pointed out that Kenneth never left the car, that he was stunned by the shot, that he panicked and drove away in fear. But the words joint mission and shared purpose hung in the air like a verdict before the jury ever spoke. When the jurors returned, the room went still. We, the jury, find the defendant, Kenneth Eugene Foster Jr., guilty of capital murder. The judge's voice carried no emotion as he pronounced sentence: death by lethal injection. Kenneth's mother fainted in the courtroom. He was 21 years old. Prison swallowed him. A small concrete cell became his world. 6 feet by 9, fluorescent light that never quite went dark. He spent 23 hours a day alone, 1 hour in a caged yard under open sky. At first, he was angry, then numb. But over time, that isolation carved space for something else. Reflection. He began reading philosophy, writing poetry, studying law. He started a prison newsletter called Nubian Redemption, using words as both shield and mirror. Letters began to arrive from strangers who saw humanity in him. He wrote back, sometimes pages long, about life, forgiveness, and the meaning of freedom when the body can't move. In 2006, the man who fired the gun, Mauricio Brown, was executed. Kenneth read the news from his cell. In a journal entry later smuggled out, he wrote, "It felt like watching a ghost disappear, a part of my past turning to dust." But he knew his own time was near. Texas set his execution date for August 30th, 2007. As the day drew closer, activists began to rally. His case had begun to attract attention beyond Texas. From journalists, lawyers, faith leaders, even some victims' rights advocates who believed the state was preparing to kill a man who hadn't killed anyone. They pointed to the law of parties and asked, if justice is supposed to fit the crime, what does this fit? Petitions spread. Candlelight vigils formed outside the governor's mansion. Posters read, "Don't kill a man for being in the car." Among those speaking out was Julius Steen, one of the passengers that night. He had testified against Kenneth in exchange for a lighter sentence, saying Kenneth knew about the robbery plan. Years later, guilt forced him to recant. Steen told reporters that Kenneth never expected violence, that he, Steen, had been pressured to testify the way prosecutors wanted. His new statement reignited the debate. Even people who supported tough justice laws began to question whether this was justice at all. As the protests grew, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles took the rare step of reviewing Kenneth's case. The odds were slim. In decades of executions, Texas had almost never recommended clemency for a death row inmate. Still, Kenneth's lawyers filed every motion they could. On the eve of his execution, his family visited him for what they thought was the last time. He hugged his daughter, Nidesha, and told her, "You'll carry my life, even if they take my breath." She was only a child. On the morning of August 30th, 2007, Kenneth woke up knowing it might be his last sunrise. He wrote a letter to his mother, folded it carefully, and handed it to a guard. The prison chaplain stopped by. Outside, reporters waited by the gates, the air thick with late summer heat. Then, at 3 p.m., the news broke. The Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles had voted 6-1 to recommend commutation. Minutes later, Governor Rick Perry announced he would accept their recommendation. Kenneth Foster's death sentence was changed to life imprisonment. The governor's statement was brief but historic. He said, "While Kenneth Foster is guilty of participating in the robbery, I am not convinced he deserves the ultimate punishment." It was the third death row commutation of Perry's long tenure, and it came just hours before the scheduled execution. Inside the prison, Kenneth sat motionless as officers told him the news. In later writings, he described the moment. "I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just felt quiet, like I had been given back time I didn't know how to use." That night, instead of the lethal injection chamber, he was returned to his cell, alive, but forever changed. Life without parole replaced death, and though it meant he might never leave prison, it also meant something else: possibility. He began mentoring younger inmates, teaching them to read, guiding them away from anger. His writings deepened, mixing theology, politics, and poetry. He spoke about accountability, not denying his role in the events that led to Michael LaHood's death, but questioning a system that equated presence with intent. He once wrote, "The law of parties doesn't just punish. It erases the difference between being there and doing the act. If justice is blind, she shouldn't be deaf to reason." Those words resonated outside the prison walls. Advocacy groups use his case to push for reform in Texas. Law students analyzed it in ethics courses. Even some conservative commentators admitted discomfort with how close the state had come to executing a man for another's crime. Meanwhile, Michael LaHood's family continued to live with their loss. In interviews, his relatives expressed both grief and exhaustion from years of appeals. Some said the commutation reopened wounds. Others quietly admitted that while they believed in justice, they couldn't celebrate another man's death. The tragedy had rippled across families. 2 lives destroyed, 4 more imprisoned, countless hearts fractured in between. From behind bars, Kenneth stayed in touch with his daughter. They spoke about books, music, and forgiveness. On one visit, separated by thick glass, she asked him what he thought about miracles. He smiled and said, "Miracles don't always look like freedom. Sometimes they look like getting one more chance to make meaning out of pain." Today, Kenneth Foster remains in a Texas prison. He spent more than half his life there, reading, writing, corresponding with advocates who call him a living example of transformation. His case continues to spark conversation about the reach of the law of parties. Legislators have debated revisions, and his name often resurfaces whenever questions arise about collective guilt and proportional punishment. Yet beyond legal debates, his story carries something quieter: the enduring question of what justice should feel like. Does it serve society to execute a man who never killed? Can redemption matter inside a system built on finality? And what do we lose when punishment forgets to listen for change? Kenneth once summed it up in a single sentence: "Every breath I take is proof that death doesn't have the last word. Conscience does." The night he should have died, a signature spared him, but it was what he did afterward that made the story worth telling. Because sometimes survival isn't luck, it's responsibility. To live differently, to turn a sentence into a lesson, to remind the world that justice, at its best, is not about who dies, but about who learns to live better after tragedy. From the quiet streets of San Antonio to the echoing corridors of death row, the story of Kenneth Foster Jr. stands as both warning and testament. A warning about how quickly law can become blind vengeance, and a testament to how even within the harshest system, the human spirit can evolve. He will likely die in prison, but his words, smuggled through envelopes and websites, have already traveled farther than freedom ever could. In them, he writes not as a victim or a martyr, but as a witness to what happens when justice and mercy collide, and to the fragile miracle that sometimes, even at the last hour, compassion still finds a way.